It's a great honor and privilege for me to come here to share with you some of my ideas. This is my nth trip to Singapore. I think this is a great country. It has been organized in a way that has produced miracles. If any country in the world has punched beyond its weight, it's Singapore. China, and probably the rest of the world, has a lot to learn from this country. So it's a great honor and privilege to be invited to come to Singapore to study and also to share with you some of my ideas. Today, the topic is Whereto, China-US Relations at a Crossroad. When we talk about China-US relations nowadays, many hold the view that the relationship is heading for conflicts and confrontation. Even my dear old friend, Professor Mike Lambton of SIS of Johns Hopkins, who had generally taken a quite optimistic view about the relationship for many years, last year sounded more pessimistic about the relationship when he said that the relationship was approaching to a tipping point. Okay. I don't know what he means by tipping point, but something bad. Looking back to the recent development of the relationship, it appears that such concerns are valid. There are indeed many conflicts between the two countries: South China Sea, Diaoyu Island, arms sales to Taiwan, cybersecurity, AIIB, and the alleged U.S. intent to deploy the THAAD system. Not the alleged anymore, it's expressed intent to deploy a THAAD system in South Korea, just to mention a few. So indeed, there are many conflicts between the two countries if you look at the relationship now. Will China and the U.S. fall into the lucidity's trap? Or, put it bluntly, fight each other? Okay. What are the major issues the two countries are facing? What is the prospect of development of the relationship in the future? Okay. These are the questions that I wish to explore in this presentation. Will China and the United States necessarily end up in confrontation? To answer this question, probably we need to clarify what we mean by confrontation. Okay? It's not just problems and conflicts we see every day. Okay? It's military conflict and military confrontation. Maybe war. Okay? If this is what we mean, will the relationship between China and the United States end up in war? Okay. Some people argue, yes, of course. Okay. It's inevitable. Okay. This has been repeatedly tested in history. Okay. People like John Mearsheimer, who is a professor of University of Chicago, he wrote a book called The Logic of Great Power Politics, okay, in which the tragedy of great power politics, in which he argues that, it's like China-US relationship, or the relationship of a rising power and the established power, is like a tragedy, a Greek tragedy. The hero knows, or has the hunch that something bad is going to happen, and he or she will try to avoid it, and but then nevertheless it happens. Okay. Like Oedipus, he has a hunch of killing his father, and he tries to avoid it. In the end, he kills his father. This is tragedy. So he argues the China and US relationship are just like that. Both countries will know that conflict and war between them is terrible and horrible. Okay? And both will make great efforts to try to avoid this event from happening. But ultimately, he argued that we are going to end up like that. Okay? And he argued that this is tested in history. Okay? You have rising powers and hegemonic powers end up in wars many times. And Professor Graham Allison has warned us this is a real possibility. Okay? Professor Graham Allison is a professor of the U.S., Harvard University. He called it a lucidity's trap. Okay? You have to be very careful of this trap. If you are not, you get into it. So this is a pessimistic argument. Okay? We are doomed. In this, the relationship is doomed. Others, however, don't agree. Okay? They argue that it is entirely possible for the two countries to avoid this so-called fateful confrontation for the following reasons. First, history does not provide any clear-cut answer to this question. If you really look into history, there were precedents in which confrontation was the result, okay? But there were also precedents in which rising states did not get into confrontation with a hegemonic state. Okay? For example, the US did not fight a war with Great Britain in its rise to eminence and domination during the second part of the 19th century. The U.S. GDP exceeded that of Great Britain by 1890. Okay. And actually, if you go over the British archives, the British even did not even think of devising a strategy of containing the United States. Okay. And then Japan and Germany, after the Second World War, rose again, but they did not end up in confrontation with the United States. So there were stories of rising powers did not get into confrontation with the existing hegemon. If one analyzes the cases of peaceful rise like these in history, we find that the most important factors that made it possible may include the following. Okay. First, acceptance of the existing international arrangements. Okay. So the rising powers accept the existing international arrangements. The United States did not challenge the British world order, nor did the Japan and Germany after the World War II. Second, abandonment of the overseas territorial expansion as a means to seek national welfare and international prestige. Okay. The United States and Japan, Germany after the Second World War did not use territorial, especially military expansion, as a way to advance their national welfare and international prestige. Despite domestic pressures and indeed periodic urge for territorial expansion, the United States did not engage in large-scale overseas territorial expansion. Unlike other rising powers of the time, it did not seek territorial expansion by force. Well, there was annexation of Texas, but first of all, that occurred before the rise of the U.S. Okay? That's during the state formation period. Second, the United States did not conquer Texas or get Texas through military conquering of Mexico. Okay. Actually, many Americans went to Mexico in a way at the invitation of the Mexican government. Okay. The Mexican government wanted to develop its own economy, so sold the land very cheaply to the Americans. After many Americans went to Mexico, they decided that they want independence. And then they asked the U.S. government to support it, and then asked the U.S. government to accept Texas to be part of the United States. It took American Congress quite some time ultimately to agree to accept Texas as part of the United States. The same happened with Hawaii. And then people say, well, the U.S. did fight a war with Spain. Okay. But the U.S. fought the war for a different reason. Okay. Because of the human rights situation in Cuba. And then after the U.S. defeated Spain, it got Philippines. Okay. But the U.S. paid something like $27 million to get Philippines. And after a few years, they decided that it's not a good idea to hold on to Philippines. So they gave up and let the Philippines to become independent. So the United States did not rely on military expansion for its rise. Okay. And of course, Japan and Germany, after the Second World War, did not have a chance to engage in military expansion. Okay. Probably they don't even want to. Okay. All these countries, for various kinds of reasons, abandoned military expansion as of territories as a means to seek economic benefits or international prestige, unlike in the old days, okay, other powers. Thirdly, they all rely on trade for national welfare and prestige. Okay. The United States relied on trade rather than territorial expansion as the principal means to obtain resources and market needed for economic development and gain international prestige. It practiced something like an open door policy, right? Access. Once I asked American expert in Congress on East Asia, I said, look, can you summarize U.S. East Asia policy in one sentence for me as a friend? And he said, I don't need one sentence. I can summarize it with one word. I said, what word? Which word? He said, access. Okay. So with access, the U.S. has, can gain market, resources, talents from other countries. Okay. It doesn't need physical occupation of the territories of other countries, okay, for its welfare, for its international prestige. The same is true with Japan and Germany after the World War II. Actually, they were very successful. Okay. Germany and Japan became the second largest economy at different times. Okay. In sum, acceptance of the existing world order, abandonment of territorial expansion by force, reliance on trade as a principal means to seek national welfare and international prestige. And finally, sharing certain basic values with the hegemonic state, okay, helped to explain why peaceful rise of the U.S. before the World War I and the rise of Germany and Japan after the World War II was possible. Okay. I haven't talked about the sharing of the values of the U.S. shared certain values with Great Britain, okay, including free trade and that sort of thing. And Japan, Germany, probably more, also in the direction of democracy and freedom and that sort of thing. So all these things made it possible for the existing hegemonic power to accept the peaceful rise of other powers. Okay. If this is true, okay, what do these findings mean for China-US relations? Will the rise of the China lead to military expansion and war with the United States? I think the answer is not necessarily. Okay. To begin with, despite its revolutionary past, China has gradually accepted the US-led world order. Okay. Actually, China has become a strong supporter of the existing international regimes, okay, and international law. Okay. China has paid its dues. Probably China is the second or third largest, contributors to the UN finances now. Okay. And China, every time, when the U.S. wanted to intervene in other countries' civil war, military conflict, China would say, well, let's let the UN Security Council to make the decision. Let's respect the authority of the UN Security Council. Okay. But sometimes the U.S. did not listen to China. It just went there anyway, like Kosovo and second Iraq Gulf War. Okay. So China probably shows more respect to the UN Security Council, okay, than the U.S. China also repeatedly calls for respect for international law. Even with the recent tribunal, of the Philippines, Chinese is saying that, what we, have been doing is entirely consistent with international law. Okay. The Filipinos have no right to go straight to the tribunal to organize, to appeal to the tribunal without consulting China. And also, Chinese leaders have been advocating a free and open trading system, okay, for quite some years. Okay. If you follow their speech closely, you'll find that they are strong advocates of free trade. Okay. In the second place, China has clearly rejected territorial expansion as a national ambition. Over the past decades, China has settled most of the land border problems through negotiation with its neighbors, with only one exception, that is with the border with India. But we are trying to stabilize the situation, and we are in the process of negotiation. Hopefully, we will eventually find a settlement, just as we have concluded so many border agreements with other countries. China has also signed an agreement with Vietnam on the maritime borders in the Gulf of Tonkin. Yeah. That's why we have 9 dash lines, not 11 dash lines, okay, in the South China Sea. Okay. What now people say, well, what about the South China Sea? What about the South China Sea? Okay. I think in the South China Sea, what China wants, okay, and also in the East China Sea at the moment, are the territorial and maritime interests China has always claimed in the past. Okay. Chinese actions or demands have not exceeded what it had always claimed. Okay. So in that sense, often gets overlooked now. Okay? People are saying, oh, China has become more aggressive. Okay? Like China has never claimed these islands and the territorial waters before. Okay? That's not true. China has argued that territorial expansion is both immoral and counterproductive. Okay? Immoral because it's imperialistic, and counterproductive because it doesn't pay. Okay? In the third place, since the adoption of reforms and openness policy in 1979, China has relied on trade and investment for economic development, national welfare, and international prestige. Actually, it has been very successful over the past 3 decades. So successful that China does not want to give it up. So like the United States, Japan, Germany after the Second World War, China has been very successful. It has a vested interest in the existing international trading system. Finally, after years of reforms, increasingly China has found itself sharing certain values with the United States, such as free market, rule of law, human rights, and democracy. China used to have a central planned economy, right? The economic system carries with its own ethics and values. Okay? Now China is practicing a market economy. Okay? At the end of the Cultural Revolution, China did not have much of a law, right? No judges, no lawyers. Okay? Nowadays, China has a complete system of laws, okay? Even though they have many problems, and many judges, more and more qualified, and also many more lawyers who have become more professional. And also, you know, Chinese are talking about human rights as a noble cause to pursue. In the old days, you know, we were not supposed to talk about human rights. They are bourgeois stuff. Okay? Now, Chinese government annually, not annually, but every now and then, would publish a white paper documenting the efforts it has made in terms of improving human rights situation in China. Of course, Chinese do not like the American definition or the Western definition of human rights. It argues that you can only every country should be allowed to or should be respected to pursue its own path of improving human rights situation in his country, according to the national conditions. And democracy, you know, Chinese government is talking about, you know, building socialist democratic politics. Okay? It has made various kinds of efforts to make Chinese politics more democratic. You know, in my school, in order to appoint a dean, you know how many process you have to go through? Okay. You have to, you know, the organization department people would come to my school, for example, to talk to the professors. First they would conduct a survey, okay, to solicit nominations. And then they would talk to the professors individually. Last time they talked to over 40 professors in my school to sound out what they would like to have as a dean, you know. And then you would have some kind of you know, public announcement of the candidate, and then, you know, people would have time to given a deadline to raise their dissent. Okay? And only after going over all kinds of complicated procedures can the dean be appointed. Okay? I think it's simpler in the US in this regard. Maybe we are more democratic in appointing deans than electing president. You know. But anyway, you know, one senior Chinese official wrote an article that democracy is a good thing. He's still there. So basically, at a fundamental level, after years of change, China and the U.S., the gap between China and the U.S. With regard to the fundamental values has been, narrowed significantly. Actually, at the fundamental level, we don't disagree. We disagree at the level of practice. How best to apply these values to in practice, according to our own respective national conditions. In addition to the nature of China's rise, I think changes in international relations since the end of the World War II have also made peaceful rise of a great power more likely. Specifically, 3 important changes have taken place at the international level that make peaceful rise of powers more possible. The first is the emergence of nuclear weapons, as it has drastically reduced the utility of war as a means of great power rivalry. Ever since the arrival of the nuclear weapons, nuclear powers don't fight each other for the obvious reason. They don't want to commit suicide. Second, the development of globalization has made it possible and indeed more rewarding for countries to rely on trade and investment for national betterment, both in terms of welfare and in terms of prestige. And thirdly, the development of anti-war sentiments throughout the world since the Second World War that has discouraged countries from engaging in military expansion because such efforts are bound to rally international resistance and condemnation. Like, what Saddam Hussein did. He tried to take over Kuwait, and then he got himself hanged. And even for just wars, like what the U.S. have claimed in the second Gulf War, U.S. has been criticized throughout the world for taking such actions. Also in the U.S., it's counterproductive. But of course, there are exceptions. Like the first Gulf War and also the war against Afghanistan. Right after the 9/11. These are rare exceptions that external wars received international support. So given all this, what is the chance for China and the U.S. to get into a military confrontation? I think the answer is it is very small. Will China and the United States avoid confrontation eventually? I think it depends. Okay? It's unlikely. It's very unlikely for China and the U.S. to get into a military confrontation. But there is still the likelihood. Okay? And whether we can avoid that kind of likelihood, it depends. It depends on how China and the U.S. handle their relationship. The fact that the rise of China may not lead to war with the United States does not necessarily mean that the two countries will not end up in war. To avoid war or military confrontation, the two countries need to make the right choices, as well as a lot of efforts. I think the risk of confrontation is still there, and it's getting larger at the moment. Okay? First, because the old views never die. Okay? People like Mearsheimer and his followers, they just believe that this is happening, and they're influencing a lot of people who don't understand what's going on. Okay? Second, there are deliberate efforts to sow suspicion, okay, and hatred on both sides for all kinds of reasons. Some because they are ideologically against each other. Okay. Others because of their own interests. Okay. I saw this poster, this picture of a fleet of Chinese, made cars, okay, protesting against the purchase of foreign cars. I mean, especially Japanese and Japanese cars because of China-Japan problems. Why? They want to sell their own cars, So there are people who have vested interests to sow suspicion and hatred between countries. This happens in China and the United States as well. Thirdly, leaders of the two countries have not yet to learn how to help each other to cope with domestic political pressures for confrontation. I think we don't have enough trust in each other to help each other. This is very important in the age of nationalism and globalization. Political leaders, they all face domestic political pressures. Okay? They need to help each other in order to avoid conflict. So in a word, things can go wrong if left unattended, and efforts must be made to ensure cooperation between the two countries if we ever want to avoid the confrontation. Now, what are the major challenges for the two countries? I think there are a few. Economic relations, military exchanges, cybersecurity, North Korea nuclear challenge, and East and South China Sea. First, economic relations. Since China's adoption of the policy of reforms and openness in 1979, China-US economic relations have experienced rapid and sustained growth. Okay. As a result, their economies have become highly interdependent. Okay. Each has a stake in the other's economy. Both countries have benefited tremendously from the process. Okay. This is the growth since 1978. I mean, China-US trade. Okay. The US goods and services trade with China totaled an estimated $659.4 billion in 2015, according to the US Trade Representative Office. And the US and China have a lot of direct investment in each other's country. Okay. Actually, China's direct investment to the U.S. has grown very rapidly in recent years. Okay. The recent statistics show that Chinese companies are expected to invest 20 to 30 billion US dollars in the U.S. in 2016. Okay. Chinese investment in the U.S. is going to surpass the U.S. investment in China. Okay. Many Chinese companies are also listed in the U.S. stock market. Some U.S. mutual funds are investing in Chinese stock market. And China, according to the Treasury Department, held 1.24 trillion U.S. Treasury bonds by May 2016. So we have huge economic stakes in the relationship. Okay. There are problems in the economic sphere, like intellectual property rights. The U.S. has accused China for not doing enough, and government procurement policy. The U.S. has been attacking China for not fair to other foreign companies in government purchase and procurement. And U.S. export control, that's Chinese complaint. U.S. export control on high-tech products. The U.S. has been complaining that U.S.-China trade is imbalanced, with China having a lot of surplus. The Chinese government has been saying, look, why don't you open up your high-tech products? China wants to purchase. Okay. The U.S. government says, no, wait a minute. Okay. The U.S. government has been saying, we want to liberalize. We'll try, but this has never happened. And also the cybersecurity problem and other obstacles for investment. Okay. So basically, the U.S. have a lot of complaints. China has a lot of complaints in trade. Okay. This is the trade deficit situation between China and the U.S. for the trade deficit for the U.S. Okay. The good news is that the two countries are negotiating a bilateral investment treaty, BIT, okay, on the basis of pre-establishment national treatment and with a negative list. Okay. If this happens, then many of the problems we have between us will be somehow solved or alleviated. Okay. However, despite the efforts made, the negotiation is still nowhere near completion. Okay. Actually, I was in Washington a few months ago, and they were saying that we still have a chance to complete the negotiation before the end of the term of the Obama administration. But I think it's probably too optimistic. Okay. Military exchanges have expanded in recent years. Okay. Actually, this happened since Xi's visit to the U.S. as the vice president in 2012. Okay. Since then, the relationship have improved a lot. Okay. Top defense officials have exchanged visits. Two sides held several joint small-scale military exercises. Chinese Navy was invited to participate in U.S.-led joint military exercises called RIMPAC. My friend in Pentagon told me that mil-mil relations between the two countries have never been better, as far as he can recall. Okay. Of course, this is only one side of the picture. Okay. The other side is, moreover, China and the U.S. reached the agreement on two confidence-building measures in 2015, which is very important. That's protocols on naval vessel and fighter plane encounters in high seas. So this is to make sure that when the Chinese and American naval vessels meet, and fighter plane meet, they would avoid accidents. But there is the other side of the picture. That is the mil-mil relationship. The number of exchanges is still limited. Whatever exchanges there are remained highly superficial. Okay. That is more in the form of protocol calls than in the form of substantive exchanges. Okay. Even in Shangri-La dialogue, it's more like a formal exchange of opinions and even criticisms rather than sitting down and try to iron out some of the differences through exchange of opinions at a pragmatic level. Even the limited and superficial exchanges are under constant threat of being suspended for various kinds of reasons, especially if the U.S. sells weapons to Taiwan again, and then people would urge for suspension of the mil-mil exchanges, like in the past. The two countries still find it necessary to use military to make a point to each other. For example, the U.S. So-called freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea. Okay. Basically, the U.S. wants to make a point. I told my American friends, I said, look, you have other ways to make a point. You don't have to send the fighting machines to make a point. It's counterproductive, but they appear to believe that it's necessary. Therefore, the two militaries only have superficial understanding of each other at the moment. They are suspicious of each other and are inclined to gauge each other's intentions from a negative perspective. This is bad for the relationship. Because the military has large say in their respective government's decision-making process, this situation poses a serious problem for the healthy development of the relations between the two countries. Well, the good news is that the two countries are paying attention to this problem. During Xi Jinping's and Obama's summit last June, President Xi made 4 suggestions for the development of relations between the two countries. One of them is to explore ways to manage differences and to actively develop a new type of military relationship compatible to the new type of great power relations between the two countries. A third cluster of problems is related to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has become a major focus between the two countries in recent years. The Snowden case helped to highlight this problem. Although the U.S. is one that brought China's attention to the problem, China is also a victim of cybersecurity threat. Like other countries, as the mobile network, Internet of Goods, cloud computing, and microblogging emerge, China is also confronted with increasingly complicated security problem in the cyberspace. According to Zhang Feng, the chief engineer of the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, computer hacking has brought a huge damage to Chinese netizens and businesses. On the cybersecurity issue, we have 4 clusters problems with the U.S. One problem is espionage. Espionage in the cyberspace is different from the traditional espionage in that its targets are broader and its intrusion in people's privacy much greater, as the Snowden case demonstrates. In the old days, when you conduct espionage activities, you target a few people who are close to the policy-making process. Nowadays, you scan the population and try to get information out of it. This is quite different. And of course, this has a serious problem of invading into people's privacy. The second aspect is commercial theft. Commercial secrets and technologies have been reportedly stolen. In all countries, such activities are criminal. However, culprit of theft in the cyberspace is very difficult to catch because it's transnational, also because the existing laws and regulations are inadequate, also because lack of technologies to identify the people who conduct the theft. Often the theft is conducted via proxy computers. As a result, such activities have increased rather rapidly. And the third aspect of cybersecurity is information pushing. For example, spread of information into a country against the government's will. It is not new. In the old days, countries have conducted this kind of activities before through other means like radio, TV. However, the emergence of Internet and mobile electronic gadgets, information can be spread at a faster pace and sent to many more people. As a result, such activities have become has brought much impact on countries' social and political stability than ever before, as seen in the color revolutions of the beginning of the 21st century, and also the Jasmine revolutions in the Middle East in recent years. And finally, attacks or warfare in the cyberspace. Computer attacks against computer systems of the military facilities and civilian infrastructure, such as electricity, railways, air traffic, nuclear power stations, financial institutions, the damage they can cause is no less than a real war. So we have 4 clusters of problems with regard to cybersecurity. On all these issues, China and the United States can find good reasons for cooperation and conflicts at the same time. Okay. However, on balance, I believe that the need for cooperation far outweighs the conflict. Okay. As for the reasons for cooperation, one can find the following. The 2 countries may agree to draw a boundary as to how far one can go in collecting information without being unnecessarily being too intrusive on privacy. And also, the 2 countries probably should should be able to agree on the means to combat, commercial theft in the cyberspace. Some people say, "Oh, China wants to do this." Okay, I don't think. I think from China's perspective, okay, if it wants an innovative economy, it cannot rely on theft to accomplish this. Okay. China is in the stage of developing its own high-tech, technologies. China is also concerned of other countries' efforts to steal with Chinese technologies and commercial secrets. So China and the United States have a common interest in this regard. And also, both countries may find a common interest to stop activities to push harmful information, such as child pornography, okay, racist attacks, terrorist propaganda, and rumors aimed at disrupting social order. Okay. So there might be a room for the 2 countries to work together on these issues, despite the fact that they have disagreement as to how far, freedom in the internet should go. And also, the 2 countries have a vested interest to promise not to launch computer attacks against the other country's military facilities and civilian infrastructure, and jointly fight against such kind of activities. So these, areas of cooperation is based upon entirely on interests, okay, not on, values. Okay. Cybersecurity is a new problem that it is absolutely important for the 2 countries to shelter differences and engage in cooperation. As major stakeholders in this area, they should also take the lead in international efforts to develop rules and norms to govern the cyberspace. North Korea, okay. China and the U.S. now agree that North Korea should not develop nuclear weapons. We should persuade and pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons. But the problem is the means of doing it. There are still differences. But increasingly, I think China feels that it's in its interest to make greater efforts to push North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons program. Okay. The test of nuclear weapons in North Korea itself poses a big threat to China's security, because the test ground is so close to China's northeast. Okay. North Korean testing facilities are so backward that an accident is very likely, okay, among other things. As China's appreciation of the threat of North Korea development of nuclear weapons, I think it is likely to take a stronger approach on this issue together with the United States. Climate change, we have made progress during the last Xi and Obama summit. And actually, because of China-US cooperation, we managed to push this issue, at the Paris summit on environment, and ultimately an agreement, international agreement, was reached to the welcome of the international community. And finally, the maritime disputes. The The maritime disputes are primarily issues between China and its neighbors, not between China and the United States. The U.S. is involved because of two reasons. One is its credibility as a security guarantor of its allies. Well, at least from the American eyes, has been challenged. Okay. The second is the U.S. wishes to defend the right of freedom of navigation by its military ships and aircrafts in high seas close to other countries, okay, in the EEZs, even though they are in the high seas. Okay. China don't agree that a country should have the right to conduct military activities and reconnaissance activities in the EEZ of other countries. But the U.S. believes that it has the right, other countries have the right, China has the right. This is a point of contention. The Xi-Obama summit resulted in agreement that the maritime disputes should be resolved peacefully through dialogue and negotiation. Okay. However, the issue has gone from bad to worse, okay. In part because of China's construction and expansion of the reefs in the Spratleys, and also in part because of the U.S. warships' freedom of navigation patrols, okay. And also joint military exercises on both sides, okay. China with Russia and the U.S. with Vietnam, Philippines, and others in the South China Sea. So now South China Sea issues have caught a lot of our attention. Okay. It's unfortunate because I believe that this is only one aspect of China-U.S. relations, one aspect of China's relationship with its neighbors. Okay. It's not the whole thing. Okay. Actually, if you look at other aspects of the relationship between China on the one hand, the U.S. on the other, or China on the one hand, the Chinese neighbors on the other, we see a lot of other things. Okay. So the South China Sea issue should be put into proper perspective. I think there are room for China-U.S. Accommodation in the South China Sea. Okay. For example, China's position. I mean, as far as China is concerned, what it can get out of the newly constructed or developed reefs or features in the South China Sea. Not much, okay. But the cost is big. In addition to the direct cost, there are a lot of side effects. Okay. And also, it hurts China's initiative on the One Belt, One Road. China has a strong interest to somehow stabilize the situation so that it can focus on other more rewarding issues. What about the future of China-U.S. relations? I think we should put the conflicts into proper perspective, like the South China Sea conflicts between China and the United States. They are worrisome, but they are not the whole picture. Okay. We should also focus on other aspects of the relationship, especially areas of cooperation. On the positive side, after many years of interactions, the interests of the two countries are converging. Okay. Actually, as China develops, China is becoming more and more like the U.S. Right? Market economy, rule of law, care for human rights, and also favors democracy on values. And in terms of interest, China is a stakeholder has become a stakeholder and supporter of the existing international order, UN, international law, and freedom of trade, free trade regime. So their interests are converging. The gaps in values are closing. Okay. And also, China is becoming another superpower. Unlike in the old days, China finds it more and more difficult to take a free ride of the existing international order. It can increasingly, like the United States, it needs to protect its own interests by maintaining the international order. So probably, like the US, it needs other countries' help to maintain this international order because it's so costly. So it needs to work with others, including the United States, make good use of their resources to help maintain the international order. Unlike in the 1950s and 1960s, Chinese leaders do not have different visions on world order. It is more a question of how things should be handled and how much say one should have rather than the nature of the world order between China and the United States. Americans may say, we still want the World Bank organized this way. We still want an American to be appointed to be the president of the World Bank. China probably will say, maybe we want something different. We want a larger share in the World Bank, quotas. Or if you don't accept this, maybe we will create another bank, like AIIB, in which we will appoint some Chinese as the president. But then we basically use the same practice. So it's not about the nature of the world order. The contention. It's about how things should be managed on specific issues. How much say one should have. After many years of interactions, the two countries have developed enough channels for effective communication. That helps to manage the relationship. The chance for them to bump into a military confrontation because of misunderstanding is very small. And also, after many years of interactions, governments of the two countries have accumulated enough experience in managing the relationship properly. They are unlikely to let the conflicts to get out of hand. So we'll have conflicts, but they will remain limited, because neither Chinese government nor the US government would allow such conflicts to get out of hand, because they know it could be disastrous. On the negative side, the US has become less confident because of the domestic difficulties and relative decline of the West. Thus, they have become more sensitive to the rise of China. Sometimes I think, what's the big deal? The Chinese are building in the South China Sea. It's just a few islands, rocks. Countries have been claiming land from the sea all the time. Including Singapore. You have land reclamation projects. Of course, it's along the coast. But then, if you look into the sea, the Philippines, the Vietnamese, even the Japanese, Koreans, they have all engaged such kind of activities. What's the big deal? Chinese, of course, are doing this at a larger scale, more rapid pace. So what? Chinese are not using the money to build aircraft carriers. Why are you so worried about? It's because the U.S. has become more sensitive to China's rise and China's behavior. I think, in part, because of that. Lack of confidence. And the U.S. is worried that other countries feel that the U.S. Is on the decline. Think that the U.S. is on the decline, may not live up to its obligations to its allies. So the Americans have become more sensitive. Also, on the Chinese side, caught in transition, China has developed dual identities and interests on many issues and finds it hard to define its interests at a time when other countries want to figure out what Chinese intentions are. Okay. Now, China is no longer the country of the past, and it's not quite the country of the future yet. It's a developing country, a developed country, a weak country, and a strong country at the same time. Okay? And developing country has developing countries' interests. Developed country has a rich developed country's interests. Weak country has a weak country's interests. Strong country has strong country's interests. But China has both kinds of interests at the same time. So it's very difficult for China to define its interests. Okay? On climate change, what is China's interest? Okay? To defend the right to development as a developing country, or to fight, to cut emission as a developed country. It's both. Okay? So China has a difficult time of figuring out its own interests and then behave in a coherent way. Okay? So increasingly you see Chinese foreign policy behavior more inconsistent and incoherent. Okay? Of course, incoherence, inconsistency is in the foreign policy of all countries. But in the Chinese case, it's much more pronounced in recent years. Okay? It happens at a time when the rest of the world most want to know what China really wants, what China is up to. But it is precisely at a time when the Chinese themselves do not know. Okay? That's unfortunate. And this has policy implications, because when other countries cannot figure out, especially the US cannot figure out what the Chinese want to do, they try to hedge. Now you have the pivot, you have balance, rebalance, okay? Policies coming from the US. They are for hedging. Okay? But when they are hedging, the Chinese become nervous. What the hell are you doing there? Okay? You want to contain China? You don't like China's rise? Look, Mearsheimer is right. Okay? So this is a time when the relationship can be easily dragged into a set of negative interactions. Okay? And also, as China rises, the pursuit of interest by third countries may also complicate US-China relations. Okay? Now what China does matters to many other countries. Okay? And of course, so when those countries act in a certain way, that may also hurt China-US relations. Russia, for example, took Crimea and asked China to support Russia. China said, we have been supporting you on Taiwan issue. Okay. And we are on your side in the South China Sea, so why don't you support us? Okay. It can be complicated. And also, the Filipino case. Philippines sent, its appeal to the tribunal without consulting China. This put the U.S. into a difficult position. Okay? Okay. That may complicate the relationship between the two countries. Anyway, the two countries are facing a lot of challenges. On balance, I believe the positive sides is still more likely to prevail, I hope. Over time, if the past trajectory of China's development continues, then China and the US will find more shared interests and visions for cooperation. Okay. To conclude, I think given the nature of China's rise and the new developments in international affairs, China and the US are by no means destined to fight a war. Instead, they are more likely to find a way to get along peacefully. Disputes between the two countries are many. Okay. If not managed well, the possibility for military conflict still remains, okay, despite what happened before. Over time, the two countries have enough stakes and also accumulated sufficient experience to manage their relationship in a peaceful and constructive way. Okay. I'll end up my presentation with this cautiously positive note. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.